I'm here with Sophie Messenger, all the way from the UK. Whereabouts are you? Are you in which part?
I'm in Cambridge.
Yeah, and I'm in East Arnhem Land. So it's really hot and it's evening here. And
Uh,
is it a cool, frosty morning there?
oh, well, it was very frosty up until Saturday, and now it's damp and not particularly cold. But I prefer cool, frosty. I give me a bright winter day with frost any day over like a damp grey. Do you see what I mean? I like
Yeah.
crispy winters. So I see that Verl has put a comment saying interesting concept for birth. And what's really interesting is since I've delved into, and in a moment I'll start sharing slides, but since I've delved into the whole topic and still delving into the whole topic because I'm writing a book about it, and the more I read, the more my mind goes, there's like actual really phenomenal research on showing what the brain does to the mind and body, but people
Mm.
think it's just a nice woo-woo thing. And what I shared on Instagram, started going, drumming really helps with the comfort sensation, comfort in childbirth. And this guy was like, what? Drumming for the pain of childbirth, what's next? I'm gonna play bagpipes. And I thought,
Hey,
should
babe.
I answer to this guy, that should I reply to this comment to go, oh yes, the actual really hard science backing this up? And I thought, should I not? This guy doesn't deserve my time, so I just blocked and delete, because I apply one rule now, which is, are you asking from a place of curiosity or from a place of judgment? Because if it's that one, I'm not interested in answering your question. And it's very liberating, because I keep thinking, wow, it's like, if people are curious, if people want to know, then I'll talk to you until the cows come home. And like, I'm delighted to share the stuff. But if it's going, oh, that's bullshit, then I'm not interested to have a conversation.
No, there's plenty of people that love to and are curious about your wisdom. So yeah, don't bother with those that are into judgment.
The one thing I'm extremely excited about to have done this year is I was approached by the International Journal of Birth and Parent Education, which is a UK scientific journal, to write an article about this. And the really interesting thing is when the co-editor of the journal approached the editor, because they were doing a whole issue on alternative therapies, and she said, you should ask Sophie to write about drumming. She said the editor was like, what? And she said, no, there's really cool science. So I was really amazed when I got an email from the editor of this journal. It was somebody I've read all her books when I was training to be an antenatal teacher. This is Professor Mary Nolan. I was like, somebody who's really a name in the field of birth and antenatal education in the UK. And I thought, that when I started reading the email, I thought it's going to ask me about rebozo or something. I was like, no, I would like you to write about drumming for birth. And so I got to publish the first ever scientific journal article about the subject in the world. And now Mary is so excited about it that she's telling everyone about it. And I've now been invited to their conference next year to do a drum journey workshop for the midwives. It tends to be read, the readership of the journal is professionals. It tends to be more like people who are in the system. The journal, I'm going to show it to you. It's called the International Journal of Birth and Parent Education.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
And in there, basically, and I'll show a picture of it when I do the slide sharing, but basically, this article written by me.
Congratulations.
And the really interesting thing is this lady here, and she's a doula in Australia. And because I had absolutely no pictures of myself drumming at birth, because when I drummed at birth in the past, most of the time I was alone. And it never occurred to me to ask somebody to take a picture of me, because I'd felt wholly inadequate. And that would have never entered my consciousness. And I never knew then that I would end up writing about it. So then I went, well, I have no pictures. And then I went online, and when I started doing a lot of research for the book and a lot of research for this paper and a lot of research for the course I taught over the summer for the first time, I I went online, I cast my net, I still am casting my net really far and wide. And on Facebook, I found this doula who had this picture. So I messaged her and we're having like a whole fantastic conversation about it. And then she sent me her book, I sent her my book, the book of, she wrote a book about going around the world on sacred site to make energy essences. And then I sent her my book about postnatal recovery. And then I got permission from her and the photographer and the mother to use that picture to illustrate the article. And since then, I've been in touch with another woman in Holland who's shared with me pictures of herself drumming during her labor, because I'd not found anyone else who'd done that. And so that's coming out in my next article, which is in the Green Parrot magazine in January.
That's
Because I'm trying to. This is great because it means that the scientific world will no longer dismiss it as pseudoscience. That's why I wrote that. But I want parents to know, and want birth educators to know. I want people who are not necessarily professionals to see that, to know that it's not just some kind of nice hippie thing to do.
I like how you bridge the science and the spiritual and bring it together. Like you're in a perfect place because with your background.
And this is what makes me happy. That like it's probably no wonder given my background, but it's really what makes my soul sing, to be going, look, there's this really cool stuff that we've known for like millennia, and look, now we know that it's actually not just a nice hippie thing to do. Any report of baby's response in utero during the drumming, not that I've ever heard that, because again, nobody studied. So drumming during birth, when I started researching the subjects about 6 months ago, I found that only one person had written about it, and that's Jane Hardwick Collins in Australia.
Only one. And
and she'd only written a blog post about it. That's all. I found nothing, and God knows I've searched. And I've also then delved into doing like, who's looked at the change of consciousness that happened during birth, and nobody. There's like a very new Israeli woman, a scientist, who's written basically 2 or 3 papers talking about the lack of research on the subject. And of course, I reached out to Sarah Buckley. There seem to be a lot of people in Australia for some reason. And Sarah Buckley has agreed to like maybe let me interview her and maybe write something for my book. But at the moment, she's finishing a PhD, so she's extremely busy. But I just like suddenly, as I delved into that, I was like, wow, no one has studied. Jane Hardwick Collins made a reference to a study in Russia where they looked at the change of women's consciousness during birth using EEG electrodes. Can you imagine being strapped up to an EEG electrode recorder whilst you're giving birth? And I've not been able to find those studies, and Jane doesn't, like, it's not the first time I hear people refer to studies in Russia that can never find. And I think sometimes stuff is done and it's not shared. You see, it's done by people and it's not necessarily published in the mainstream scientific journals. It really blew my mind when I was like, nobody studied what happens to the state of the brain whilst we give birth. And of course, the ethics of that would be very complicated. But when I started looking at that, I'm like, wow, there's no wonder most people in the health professional field do not even like consider the impact of what we do on the birth trance, because that's what happens during birth. We go into a trance. And well, if birth is supported to unfold that way, because what I also started to see is that the Western medical model of childbirth is actively preventing that trance from happening. And again, if I'm going about the theme of control, well, if you've got a woman who's had the birth trance, the change that happens doesn't fit with the model of society we have, which is one where you do as you're told. Because once you've had this kind of experience, look what happened to me. I left a 20-year career in science. When my son was 4 months old, and I went to a big birthlight conference in Cambridge with them with Michel Audin, Aina Megaskin, Frédéric Leboyer. I went there with my bright eye and bushy tail. I want to change career with my son in a sling. And I spoke to a woman at that conference who said to me, see, the system doesn't want women to have births like yours, because look what happened to you. And that's exactly what it is. It's beneath the sort of safety paradigm, the terminology that I'm quoting Jane Hardwick Collins here. She said, modern maternity care is institutionalized abuse of mother and babies masquerading as safety. And then another Australian midwife I love, Rachel Reid, in a book, Reclaiming Birth as a Rite of Passage, she talks about the rituals of modern obstetric, and she says, since we know that CTG monitoring doesn't improve outcome, but we keep using it, it's almost like using a medical modern Western version of just carrying some kind of amulet on the body to protect the mother. It's quite deep, the topic. So drumming, where it comes, and in a minute I'll start showing some slides where drumming is incredibly suited to what's happening in our world at the moment, with mind-blowing, like stellar rise of induction and all intervention and cesarean. And I mean, in the UK, as I speak right now, some hospitals have a first-time mother induction rate of 47%.
So high.
And I only know that because I know people in the field who've done freedom of information requests to the hospital, because usually the hospital only shares the rate for everyone, but we all know that first-time mothers are much more likely to be induced than second or third or subsequent birth.
Nearly half.
It's nearly half, and it's growing. And what I saw is in my local hospital, there was a rise of almost 10% before COVID and after COVID. And I was like, you can't justify that medically. And every time this gets challenged, people say, oh yeah, but if we don't induce and if we don't do cesarean, there'll be more stillbirths. And I wrote a blog post when I went to look at the stillbirth rate in the UK in 2010 and the stillbirth rate in 2020, and it's not changed, but the rate of induction has gone from 21% to 35%.
So where's the rationale behind that?
Because the system, another Australian guy, Marsden Wagner, who's passed away, who's written in 2010 or before that, a paper called Fish Can't See Water. It's people who are inside the system of medical care. They can't see. They can't, like, even I, somebody who was a doula for 10 years, it wasn't until I stopped for many, many months. I stopped working actively as a doula in April 2022. And it wasn't until nearly a year later that I started noticing how my mindset changed, because I was no longer inside and I was looking at it from afar and going, it's not going to change. There's no point using any effort at the system, because the system is not broken. It was created that way.
So you are now awakening the power of women to reclaim their bodies in birth, and also to do it from outside the system is really the only way to really have a big impact.
And then another thing that really hit me in the face when I started researching drumming and childbirth is that I've interviewed a lot of women. Some I drummed at, but also other women who have not been their doula or looked at, Jane Hardwick Collins' article on the subject. And one theme is, for instance, that when you do drumming during pregnancy, it gives you a sort of direct communication route to your baby. So often women who will not know how to get in direct communication with their baby will do some drumming, and then after a while they won't even need the drumming because they'll have learned how to do it. But then I started looking at that and I thought, because some of the women who did, for instance, free births, and I interviewed and used the drumming as a way to communicate with their baby, they said they had a very clear channel of communication with their baby using the drumming. One of them said she drummed every day in her pregnancy because that was her time tuning into the baby and asking how the baby was doing. And then I stopped and thought, hang on, how did we get to a culture where we think that the only way we can communicate with our baby when we're pregnant is through a machine?
Like the ultrasound or the Doppler.
How did we get to a space like that? Because drumming aside, when you're pregnant, you have 24/7 contact with the baby, and if the baby is okay or not okay. You know, like I've also seen the system ignoring women both ways. If a woman says, I think my baby's okay, well, yeah, we want to induce you anyway. But if a woman says the opposite, as a doula, I've seen that happen where somebody says something's wrong and they go in, people do a CTG and they send them away, go, you're fine. And the mother's going, something's wrong.
That's the
And the
intuition.
mother knows. You know, I had a friend who planned a home birth, and at the 11th hour, last minute, she decided to have an elective cesarean, and the baby, when they did the cesarean, had a velamentous insertion of the cord. So something where the cord is attached to the placenta with just a tiny, instead of being in the vein going into the placenta with a nice thick band of tissue around it, it's just attached through some kind of tiny little filament where there's a risk that if the baby is born that way, the cord rips and the baby dies.
So
And it's not the machine that told her that, you know, the machine would have told her, no, it's fine. I've seen it so many times. I've seen a woman in labor go, my baby can't come out because the cord is preventing her from descending. And she asked me to do some Reiki on her during her labor, and I was doing Reiki on her shoulders. Like I had my hands on her shoulders, and the baby dropped. And she said, what did you do? And I like popped her eyes open, and I said, I don't know. And then the baby dropped into the pelvis, and the heart rate went boom, 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 boom. And then the baby went back up, and the heart rate went back up. And it's like this baby was basically saying, see, I can't come out. So when this woman finally, after having told 4 different doctors, this baby is not going to come out because the cord is wrapped around her. And she talked about it since she was 12 weeks pregnant.
you knew.
No, this never happens. And then eventually she had a cesarean, in labor cesarean, and they found a cord that wrapped around the baby's tummy so many times that the baby could not come down. Now that's very rare.
Yeah.
It's only seen that once in 10 years, but this woman knew.
She had the knowing. Yeah.
And you know, the drumming, where it can be incredibly powerful, is almost as an antidote to undo the fact that we've all been taught unconsciously since infancy that we don't know what's right for us, that we're supposed to hand over the knowing to the experts. And then when you do that, you know, it's very hard to undo that learning because it's been fed into us time and time and time again from very early age. From most mainstream parenting in the West works on that principle. Most education works on that principle. The medical care works on that principle. So it's a bit like when I was teaching antenatal classes and most couples had never done any form of meditation and relaxation. You can't just become good at it overnight. You know, people are literally twitching when you're telling them to try and take some deep breaths and just calm their system down. The drumming, where it's hugely powerful over, say, meditation, is because it changes your state of consciousness, whether you want it or not. And it's not an effort. So it works even just listening to the drumming. The story I love to share is that my husband, who doesn't believe in any of that, when I was replaying on the computer a track of myself drumming that I'd recorded so I could share it with my students, and I was playing it on the computer to check the sound, and my husband was working on the next computer in the same room as me, and he said, can you stop that thing? It's making my brain go funny.
Yeah, so it was actually affecting him. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so powerful, isn't it?
Let me just check some of the questions that people have asked in the chat. Wendy says, I've been speaking about drumming for birth with some of the women I look after. They are really interested. Yes, I think that people remember, you know, that's something we should have. And Val says the induction rate is even higher here in Johannesburg. At one private clinic, I do sessions at very few vaginal physiological birth. Yeah. Drumming activates our primordial forces, and I'm sure drumming sound would help women drop into the limbic system. Yeah, that's exactly what happens when you drum. And I'm talking about what the research shows is this drumming that entering the brain fast is this type of drumming. It's about 3 or 4 beats per second, sorry. So it's quite quick. it's shown in published research with EEG recording, electroencephalogram recording. It's shown in public research that when you do this type of drumming, within 10 to 15 minutes, people's brain drop into a much slower brainwave state, but also that it gets the two hemispheres of the brain to synchronize. So it gets people what shamans have always known, which is, the drum can be used as a vessel to, like a vehicle to enter a different consciousness. The research is showing that. Yeah, I should probably start sharing my slide, because I think it'd be more meaningful if
Let's
there's
see.
pictures. Are you happy for me to start sharing stuff? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm going to share sound as well. Now, where is my...
Hopefully I gave you permission to do all of that.
Yeah, hang on. Let me just go to my... Yeah. And I need to go back to slide number 1. Just give me 2 seconds and I will start sharing. Okay, so let me share my screen, complete with sharing sound, because there's a video at the end. Can you see that okay?
Yes, I can. That's fabulous.
Right, so drumming for birth and life transition, because what I've discovered as I started doing this is much broader than just birth. The principle of what I'm going to share, they apply to any women's life transition and any reclaiming of power around that, actually. So I'm just going to have a brief about me. I'm going to talk about why I created this class, give some historical background, something about the science of drumming, talk about how drumming supports the birth journey, stories of drumming at birth, how drumming supports life transition and further learning. And I just want you to be aware, obviously, there's a very deep and broad subject. Over the summer, I taught a course online that included 7 90-minute live classes and a lot more sharing of written text. So this is half an hour presentation. We are only going to have a whistle stop tour of the topic, which is there's a lot more to it than what I'm going to share in it today.
And people will just have to do your course and class if they want to.
And I want to share about this because I feel so much that this is something that's needed back into women's life at this moment in time in human evolution. So what about me is I was a research scientist for 20 years. I've got a PhD in physiology of reproduction. And when after my first child was born and he turns 18 in February, I had a complete change of career, complete change of passion. And I retrained to become an antenatal educator and a birth and postnatal doula. I was also for a while a birth and postnatal doula mentor, and I even taught doula courses. And the being at birth led me to really reignite my desire to have more mastery of energy, because you can't be at a birth and not feel the tremendous energy in the room, especially at the moment of birth. So I trained to be a Reiki practitioner and a Reiki teacher, and then eventually also trained to be a Reiki drum practitioner and teacher, where you channel Reiki through the drum. And I ended up very quickly from being somebody who taught parents to facilitating workshop for birth professionals. In fact, I started doing that in 2012 because I was like, well, people don't know about this, so I need to tell them. And I started very quickly teaching again what you were talking about earlier before, Mel, which is my signature thing of blending scientific and postnatal knowledge. And 3 years ago, I published my first book, which is called Why Postnatal Recovery Matters, which is a call to action to bringing back a period of rest out after the birth and how to make it happen in the Western modern world. So my journey of drumming is 10 years ago, I went to a retreat, a doula retreat in some magical place in nature. And there was a workshop on shamanic drumming. And I remember thinking, well, what's that bullshit? I was really not believing into it. And as the facilitator led us through a shamanic drum journey, and I thought, that's not going to work. I had the most mind-blowing, vivid visuals. Really, truly amazing experience. And so I went to France on the summer holiday and I told my mom I want a drum. And my mom said, well, I have this baron I bought in Ireland from the oldest baron maker years ago. Would you like it? And I came home with this drum. And the baron typically is an Irish traditional drum. You're supposed to play it with a little stick that you like, with a little stick that you like to have to twiddle in a very specific way. And my brother is a professional musician, and he tried to show me YouTube videos of how you meant to play this drum. And I was like, I'm really not good at this. So I came back to Cambridge with my drum, and also massive imposter syndrome. And luckily I had a friend called Peter Voschel, who's a shaman and a scientist. And he was like, well, Sophie, what do you want to do with this drum? Do you want to play in an Irish band? And I said, no, I want to do some shamanic drumming. So he showed me how to make a beater, and the rest is history. And I feel that it took me so long to overcome imposter syndrome around this. In fact, it took me years, that I have a whole module in my online course about this. And I will teach, when I teach in person, I will also cover this very deeply, because I know that we, especially as women, we have a lot of work to overcome the idea that we're not qualified to do something, because that's the culture we live in. So eventually I trained in Reiki drum practitioner and teacher, and then I started then offering drum during pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum. In fact, I had started with the postpartum first, because I started integrating drumming as part of closing the bone rituals, because it just felt right to do that. It felt like it helped the sort of going inward process. And in June this year, in June 2023, I took a 4-day Sacred Women Drum Circle facilitator training, where I made this drum, which is an egg-shaped drum.
Beautiful.
And so this some of the pictures of some of my drums, because I actually have 20 drums now, 3 of which I've made. And I'm not going to show you pictures of the 20, but the big drum in the middle, the one I'm holding with my eyes closed, and also the same drum is shown on the bottom left picture. It's a carved birth drum that I've had made especially, and you can see it's quite big, as a representation of the energy field of a woman during birth, made by a Finnish artist who specializes in redoing traditional northern drums, because he realized that they had been all destroyed, and there were only about 60 of them left in museums around the world, and that nobody was making them anymore. So when I was close to turning 50, I asked him to make me this, and that's the result. And it's a birth drum, and it's really powerful.
Yeah, it looks very powerful.
Yeah. It's big as well. It's heavy and big, so I don't take it to do healings, because I've tried to do that. When I do healing, I hold the drum up over the person like this way, and that means I'm carrying the whole weight on my forearm, and I just couldn't do it with a drum. It's like, oh my god, this is so heavy. Incidentally, shamans, for instance, Mongolian shamans often have drums that weighs 8 kilograms, and they can only hold them whilst in trance, because they have a lot more strength whilst in trance. So it's an interesting thing. So my practice now is I've been drumming weekly as part of a private drumming circle with 2 other women, and we do that at dawn in the forest near my house in Cambridge, and we've been doing it for 3.5 years. And the impact of that practice has been phenomenal. A lot of the confidence I have drumming comes from that, because that's become normal for my life to do that. I've been running shamanic drum circles near Cambridge since 2020. I use drumming in ceremonies and healing. I've mentioned I own 20 drums. I teach drumming for life and birth and life transition. I wrote the first article in a scientific journal. I'm writing a book about drumming to support women through birth and life transition. I'm looking for stories to share in that book. So if you know anyone who might be wanting to share a story, send them my way. And because of all this, in the autumn this year, I started a new podcast called The Wisdom Messenger. It's a play on word, because my name is Sophie Messager, and Sophie means wisdom in Greek, and Messager means messenger in French. And I wanted to share so many different topics. I thought, what the heck am I going to call it? To not restrict myself. I didn't want to call it drumming podcast or something, and I started that a few weeks ago.
And perfect.
Yeah.
I just found it on Spotify, so I'll be listening.
It's available on Spotify and YouTube and Apple Podcast. And so some of the pictures of some of the community and healing work that I do, including circles, and the middle bottom pictures is me giving a talk about the science of drumming at the first ever UK convention of women drummers, literally a couple of weeks ago, which was the first ever convention of its kind, and I had 150 women drumming together in there. It was incredible. We're doing it again next year, and it'll be even bigger. So this is clearly there's an appetite for that in the world at the moment.
There's a movement that, yeah.
Yeah. So this is a picture of the article I was mentioning earlier. I love that picture shared by doula Anna Watts, who's an Australian doula. And the boss of the picture on the front of the article and that picture on the right hand side. I think it's absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
So why am I sharing this? Is because giving birth is a rite of passage and a spiritual transition. It's also a modified state of consciousness, a trance state, and neither the rite of passage nor the trance state are recognized within the medical model. And drumming is a way to reclaim this. It provides many benefits to the mind and body, and literally we need it back. So just to give you a potted history of drumming is not a new age thing. In fact, not doing it is a new thing. Not doing it is not normal. Frame drums, which are basically similar to what I've got here, or the one on the picture on this slide, they're usually wider than they are deep, and they're usually made of wood and animal skin. And some of the oldest musical instruments I ever found, and we found drums that are as old as 5000 BC. And the thing that I find the most exciting, and I can't remember if I've got the book accessible here, but it's somewhere on my pile. I've got a pile of books next to my desk to use for reference for my book. And there's a book written by a woman called Lane Redmond, which sadly has passed away, but the book is called When the Women Were Drummers, a spiritual history of rhythm. And what she explains in this book is that drumming used to be done by women exclusively in matriarchal societies. And there's lots of evidence of that, like through carvings and paintings. And she goes around this a very scholarly book. She goes around the entire world going, these are where we used to have women drumming. She said that women were priestess of the goddess in goddess venerating society. And then when patriarchy came along with land ownership, and basically the move from being hunter-gatherers to agriculture is accompanied with land ownership, and that's accompanied with the rise of patriarchy, and that's accompanied with the removal of drumming from women, because obviously there's a lot of power there, and it used to be that women were priestess, and then it became something that was only done by men. So it's a big ancient reclaiming to start drumming. And in this book, that's Lane Redmond has a couple of sentences where she says that they use drumming. The priestesses of the goddess used we knew which rhythm facilitated childbirth and which induced the ecstatic trance of spiritual transcendence, and that and drum rhythm caused the womb to contract, facilitating labor and childbirth. So this is not a new thing, because you're looking at stuff that was done like prior to 5000 BC.
Ancient wisdom.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, I found when I started researching it a few months ago that there's almost nothing written on the subject of drumming for birth and of drumming to support women's life transition. That apart from Len Redmond's book, which only has a couple of quotes that mention it, Jane Hardwin Koenig's article, there are no books and there were no scientific articles. That's why I started writing and offered training, because I was like, no one is writing about that. And in the process of researching the course and the book I started writing a few months ago, I went back and interviewed all the women I had drummed for at their birth, and you'll see some of their quotes in the stories in the slides I'm sharing. But what blew my mind is those women kept saying the same thing. I'd not ever asked the women, what did it do for you, the drumming? So I brought some very specific questions, and I went back and interviewed every single one of them. And they all shared similar things, which I found mind-blowing. And so going into the scientific evidence, What we know is that the drumming induces relaxation and calm the nervous system, that it changes brain waves. I'm going to show a picture to illustrate that in a minute. That it changes your state of consciousness. That drumming has been shown to reduce pain and increase the release of endorphin, which are the natural body's painkillers. It decreases stress. It improves immunity and has an anti-inflammatory effect. It improves cardiovascular health and decreases blood pressure. It reduces depression and anxiety, improves mood, and reduces hyperactivity. And there's even recent research showing that it can help people with autism and also help people with ADHD. And what we need to know about this research is that it's obviously in the research, they can't discriminate. First of all, the research doesn't discriminate which type of drumming. So that includes drumming with djembes, drumming with drum kits. You know, the improved cardiovascular health is often linked to people drumming with a drum kit. But also they can't discriminate in this process the effect of the drumming and the effect of the sort of community that comes with it, because often people don't drum alone. So it's a complex thing to unpack which part of the drumming does what. But actually, overall, you know, the impact on well-being are absolutely mind-blowing. And I found more stuff since the more I delved into that, I find programs like there's a guy who's written a book called The Healing Power of the Drum, and he runs a company called Stress Solutions Incorporated, where he goes around the States doing drum circles, because it's been shown to really help like stressed out CEOs and employees to calm their nervous system down. And there's locally to me, there used to be a guy who ran a program called Drum Not Guns to help avoid violence in young people. You know, it's just absolutely phenomenal. It's everywhere. There's programs on helping people through drumming. So what I want to explain about the brain waves is with these pictures here, because it's much easier to understand with pictures. So in your brain state, you have delta, which is the bottom, it's a very slow brain waves. It's when you're in deep sleep. And then you have theta, which is when you're in light sleep. And then you have alpha, which is the state between being really alert and being lightly asleep, which is pretty much what we could describe that the state of flow. You know, when you're alpha, is when you're like, say, an experience that most of us are likely to have had is you're driving somewhere and you arrive and you don't know how you got there. Or you're doing something that you're enjoying so much that you lose track of time. That kind of stuff is alpha. And then beta is a heightened alertness, which is needed for completing certain tasks. And gamma is when you're really, really, really super focused on something. But what's interesting is what we know is that we should be spending a lot more time in alpha. As a culture, we spend almost all our time in beta and gamma. And children are almost always in alpha, and babies are in like theta and delta. And there's a direct link between how fast your brain waves are and anxiety and depression. And so being too focused, it's like almost your brain going all the time. You can't, this is not sustainable. And one of the pieces of research that really blew my mind was finding this guy in the States who'd been a therapist for 11 years. He worked with people who are what they call hypervigilance, so people who are got PTSD from previous military, people who've been to war and that kind of stuff. And he said he couldn't get them to have alpha waves. He recorded their brain with electrode, and he was trying meditation and he was trying biofeedback, and he spent 11 years trying to get those people to have alpha waves, and they didn't. And then somebody said, have you ever heard about drumming? And so he got all these people to do 20 minutes of drumming once, and they all had alpha waves.
Wow, that's incredible.
One session, in the book he says, not 5 sessions, one. And I like, when I read that, I was like, oh my God, and wait until I tell you about Corinne Sombrin. So Corinne Sombrin is one of my favorite people, and I expect that none of you will have heard about her because she's French and all of writing's in French. So sorry, Sombrin with an R. I misspelled her name there. Between the B and the U, there's supposed to be an R. So what Corinne Sombrin, what I find really exciting about her is she was a BBC, she's a French, but she was a BBC journalist and a musician. She was sent to Outer Mongolia in 2001 to do a documentary on Mongolian shamans. And so when she witnessed her first shamanic, what's the word I'm looking for? Not the word seance, but when she witnessed her first ritual, thank you. She went into a trance so immediate and deep, the shaman had to stop the ritual and bring her back and say, why did you tell me you were a shaman? You could have died. Because she transformed into a wolf.
Wow.
And she basically, Corinne at this time in her life, a partner of 10 years had just died, and she was in a desperate mental health state. And this women shaman, which is the one on the picture at the bottom there, say to her, well, you're going to have to stay trained with me, because if you don't do what the spirit have chosen for you, even worse stuff going to happen to you. That's what's already happened. At first she was like, I'm not doing this, but eventually she came around to the idea and spent 9 years training 4 months of the year in the middle of outer Mongolia. So these are nomadic people who herd reindeer and move, according to where the season is and where they need to be on the land. So she spent 9 years training with them, becoming the first ever white woman or white person at all to become a ratified Mongolian shaman. And there was discovered Corinne because there was a movie made on her life called Un Monde Plus Grand, a bigger world. And what happened to Corinne is she came back, as she was undergoing her training and going, wow, something really profound is happening here. I want to know what's happening to my brain. She went to see scientists in Paris. She got them to record her brain during trance, and every single one of them was going, you should stop that thing immediately because your brain looks like you've got schizophrenia. And she was ignoring them. She was like, no, there's something about this that's really useful and powerful. So for 10 years, she banged her head against the scientific world where they were like, no, this is bullshit. We're not doing this. This is dangerous. You shouldn't be doing that. Eventually found a guy in Canada who was interested to studying. So they published together in 2017 the first ever paper on trance, shamanic trance, Mongolian trance, and what it does to the brain. And because of the way the machines work, they say to her, you can't bang your drum whilst we're recording you because it's messed up with the machine. So she had to learn first to find like some sound loop that would induce she created a sound loop in the lab using the best part of the drumming that she found she could induce trance in 90% of people with that. So she's flying in the face of the whole, only shamans can do it. But then because they said even when you're listening to the drumming, you're like still moving too much. She had to learn to self-induce the trance with no sound, which is succeeded in doing and teaches now. And basically they eventually, together with a bunch of other scientists, they co-founded the Trans Science Research Institute in Paris, and they're now teaching a diploma of university about it. It started last September, and there's like several, like about 14 or 15 research projects going on from mental health, physical health, psychiatric health, trauma, because they're saying that the drumming and this self-induced trance has incredible potential in terms of psychiatric health in particular. But also not just psychiatric health. There's a series of YouTube video where she has a scientific friend who's got cancer in his pelvis and is paralyzed. His pelvis is paralyzed, and she starts playing the drum for him, and he regains mobility within 3 months. It's truly mind-blowing stuff going on.
Mind-blowing. It's so good that it's now being researched at that university level.
I know, because in the world we're in, that's why I wrote this article here. The world we're in is, unless it's published in research, everybody's going to say it's not true, right? It's not doing what it says on the book. So for me, my drumming experience beyond the science is it brings back the sense of sacredness to life. The trance state and the deep meditative state you achieve with drumming is a lot faster than trying to meditate on your own. Like, you don't have to try, it just does it. It feels to me like my brain's being massaged, because it, like how you got tight muscles and you can't move. Well, when you do drumming, suddenly your brain just loosens and you can find solutions to problem, kind of looks at problem from the side, and it facilitates being present. Like when you're drumming, I find when I'm drumming, I'm really in the drumming, and also facilitate a sense of community and belonging through the drumming community that comes with it. So how drumming helps during pregnancy in particular is because it helps the mother connect with her intuitive knowledge. Because of the way the drumming helps being more easy than just trying to quiet your brain down and listen to the baby. It does it without, it's like a conduit for it. It does it for people without them having to try. And it really helps women connect with their babies. And then it also promotes a sense of calm and focus and empowerment, reduces anxiety, facilitates a sense of community and support. You know, if women go to drum circles or we incorporate drumming as part of ceremonies, brings a sense of sacredness to the pregnancy. And also, very importantly, helps people to stand up to the system. Because if the woman has been really able to communicate with the baby, and including, for instance, you can do a drum journey to ask the baby how they want to be born, then women are much less likely to go when some obstetrician they've never met before tell them at 12 weeks pregnancy that they'll induce their labor at 38 weeks because they've got whatever the prescriptive system says. You know, in the case of the woman on the picture, who is somebody that I drummed for during her pregnancy, labor, and postpartum, and this is a picture, this is a mother blessing we did for her. She was like saying to these doctors, no, you're not telling me now at 12 weeks pregnancy that my baby is going to be in danger at 38 weeks. The only reason they wanted to do that is because she was over 40 and the baby had been conceived through IVF. And, you know, it really helps people tune into their power. So another story from a friend of mine called Camilla said, I came to the drum circle on my due date to ground myself, to feel the vibration, and because I felt that it would calm my baby into going into our world. And this is a quote from Jane Hardwick Collins' blog post on the subject. Drum journeying during my pregnancy allowed me to go within into my womb to journey with and meet my baby. I got to see baby up close and personal. This was amazing. I felt as though I touched my baby before the birth, our soul connected on a deeper level. And that's just one of many stories I've heard of a similar nature from other women. So during labor and birth, using the drumming can really help support the altered state of consciousness that needs to happen for birth hormones and the process to unfold. Because especially in the context of going into hospital, what I find is that when you're at home, usually there's a lot more quietness and reverence that naturally happen. But when you go into the hospital system, people are so in their sort of right brain thinking that they are, so I can never remember, left is creative.
Right, huh? I think right. Right is creative.
Right opposite. Is creative. Yeah, left is logical. So people in the Western world are more valuing left brain thinking than right brain thinking, you know, the numbers. And the birth is not a left brain thinking process. It, you know, birth happens in our primal brain. So the drumming really facilitates that, facilitating calming and soothing, facilitated pain relief because of the endorphin release, because of the vibration, and because of the focus that the drumming gives. It helps women to be really present, helps connect with the baby during the labor, connecting with inner knowing again. And then lots of stories that I've heard of women saying that it helped them know what to do when there was a challenge that happened during the birth. So Lee, who was a client of mine, said, at home I felt in my own space, but in the hospital I felt at the mercy of the system, vulnerable. The drumming stirred up my sense of empowerment and standing up for myself. It gave me a power boost. It felt like it was saying, open up, relax, trust your body, have faith in the journey.
So you've been drumming in the hospitals quite a bit as a doula?
I have done it a few times, yeah. I've done it more at home, but I've done it a few times in the birth center and in the delivery unit. And this is another story from Jane Hardwick Collins' article. As the contraction started with the drumming, the pain of the contraction would melt away, and as I felt the drum beat vibrate through my sacrum, the tension seemed to lift, and this allowed me to experience many painless contractions. In my podcast, there's 3 episodes of my podcast that are about drumming and birth. The first one is with Jane Hardwick Collins, and there's one where I'm talking about this article that I've published, being interviewed about this, and then there's another one that's talking about that. And in the Jane Hardwick Collins interview, she talks about her own experience of birth and how she felt she couldn't go on, you know, when you hit that transition stage. And she said the drumming helped her to like transcend that and have what she called an ecstatic birth. So what I want to say is, whilst the research shows that 3 or 4 beats per minute is shown to entrain the brain changes most effectively, drumming, the best use of drumming is the one that's guided by an intuitive drummer who feels into the space and drums according to what's going into the space. So sometimes it might be really slow heartbeat type, or sometimes it might be, you know, really completely, the speed, the amplitude, the loudness, all of these things are completely changed. So my experience is also some women only use it during pregnancy, some women only during birth, some only during the postpartum, and some during the whole thing. And some women like the drumming during early labor, some during established labor, and some only during pushing, and everything else in between. Because one of the story I want to share about that is that I had a client who hired me to drum at her birth, and we drummed during the whole pregnancy, and we drummed during most of the labor, and then she started to push. I picked up my drum and she went, no. And vice versa, I had another client who I never picked up my drum during the labor, and then when she started to push, I thought she needs help. So I got my drum out, and she said, oh my God, why didn't you do that before? And I said, because she told me afterwards, and I said, because it didn't feel like you needed it before. So like I said, it's not just for the birth, because all this quality I've talked about, the ability to tune in, the ability to access your own wisdom, to be in a more relaxed, present state. This is not just useful for the birth, it supports the same through all life transition, like for instance, menopause, conception, fertility, IVF, endings and beginnings in women's life, grief, miscarriage, stillbirth, any physical or emotional trauma, and any time in your life where you need to overcome challenges, but also times of celebration. It's not just about supporting difficult times. It's also a really beautiful way to celebrate moments in life. So just want to conclude by saying drumming offers a unique modality to support birth and beyond, helps find inner strengths, helps relaxation, reduce anxiety, enhances well-being, and provide a sense of community, can help connect with the baby and the inner wisdom, can build self-confidence and intuition, and support empowerment. And I just want to show, before I have just a few slides to tell you about my course, I want to show, not just about my course, about where you can find more information, that I have made this little sort of tester video of example of how drumming can be used, and it's just a couple of minutes long. So I'm just going to play this now. We are the women, we've come to drum. We are the channel between the earth and the sun. We are the keepers of the ancient ways. We will bring peace to these troubled days. We are the women, we've come to drum. We are the channel between the earth and the sun. We are the keepers of the ancient ways. We will bring peace to these troubled days. We are the women, we've come to drum. We are the channel between the earth and the sun. We are the keepers of the ancient ways. We will bring peace to these troubled days. We are the women, we've come to drum. 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 We are the channel between the earth and the sun. We are the keepers of the ancient ways. We will bring peace to these troubled days. We are the women, we've come to drum. We are the channel between the earth and the sun. We are the keepers of the ancient ways. We will bring peace to these troubled days. We are the women, we've come to drum. We are the channel between the earth and the sun. So just want to share there, maybe a chance to, for a few minutes of like, how did that feel watching that video?
So emotional. Yeah. It's even just listening to that drumming then and your voice almost put me in a trance. I felt tears start to come. That's how powerful it is, that remembering.
Yeah, that's what I feel it does. It's like call it cellular memory, ancestral memory, but it's a bit like, the first time I witnessed Closing the Bones and I felt this longing. I wanted me to be there lying down receiving this wrapping, and the drumming created exactly the same thing. The first time I was exposed to drumming, I was like, I want that in my life. Like, why have I not got that in my life?
Yes.
And that's why I just want to spread the word. I've written several blog posts on my website. I've got the podcast I've mentioned. There's the article by Jane Hardwick Collins that you can find by just writing drumming in pregnancy and birth or drumming during birth. You'll find it. I was interviewed in a podcast by Alexia Lichman, who runs a podcast called Fear-Free Childbirth about drumming for birth. There's the article I mentioned in the scientific journal and the article in the Green Parent magazine coming out in January next year. And I want to mention my online course. So I created this course because I realized there's no training out there. And I thought I was only going to do it in person. And then I realized, well, that's not going to work because a lot of my audience is in, like, I think I have audience in 25 or 30 different countries now. So if I do it live in Cambridge, that's not going to work, is it? So I decided to run the online course live for the first time in the summer. So now it's available as a pre-recorded course. And there's 11 hours of live Zoom class training divided into 7 classes. There's a lot of further knowledge in written in video stuff that is accessible and limited in my course portal. The course includes access to a private Facebook group, and there's the option to submit case studies at the end to build confidence and certify. And also the option to attend for people who are in the UK or can come to the UK, the first ever in-person weekend training. I'm going to tell you more about that. And the course itself cost £149. And the weekend training is at the end of January 2024, so last weekend of January 2024. It's a whole weekend in a beautiful barn near Cambridge, UK, to learn drumming for birth and women's life transition, to learn intuitive drum healing, to learn to take part in drum journeys, how to offer drum journeys, to take part in drum circle, and a lot more. It's just a lot of practical experience of drumming. And this is on the 27th and 28th of January, and it costs £349. And I want to offer a special offer for people who are live, or anybody who is watching this video before the next 3 days, which is £30 off my online course using the code Childbirth. And that's valid until the evening of Thursday, the 7th of December, 2023. And I also want to mention that I have 6 online courses in total. One, it is a rebozo massage and closing the bone ritual course. One that is a rebozo course. One to run a mother blessing. One on the art and science of postpartum wrapping, and one on how to prepare for a nurturing postpartum. Each of these courses costs £149. And there's the option to purchase all 6 for half price with code all courses. And I got a feedback form, which I think it might be easier if I, rather than sharing it live here in the Zoom, that maybe I can send you the link if you want to share it with people, Mel, and that's it. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if anybody has any questions they want to ask,
thank you.
You're very welcome to, yeah.
Vel put some notes there. She said, wow, resonating so deeply. I'd like to start drumming for birth here in South Africa.
Yes. Yeah, I'm very, very biased, obviously, because I want lots of people to do that. But when I started the course I ran over the summer, there were 10 women from about 6 different countries, and lots of them, when they said I can't find a drum circle in my area, I said, well, you're gonna have to start your own, because that's what I did. The reason I started the drum circle in Cambridge in 2020 was because I was like, well, I want to be in one, and there isn't one. And there isn't a real appetite for drum circles because they're growing like left, right, and center. And when I attended what I was very excited is Melanie Siret, who has a website called thedrumwoman.com. She does drum birthing and training, and she's absolutely awesome. When she decided to run this women drummer and makers convention for the first time in the UK about 6 months ago, and she rented this big village hall, and she said, okay, there's going to be enough space for 150 people. She sold out with a waiting list within weeks.
Wow.
The next year she's doing 2. She's doing one mixed gender one in April and another one women only, and this time she's doing a whole weekend instead of just a whole day. And when I came to this convention, it was at the beginning of November, and I walked in there, and the day started with a group of women drumming that song I just sang on the video I showed you. And I was like, that's my kind of conference. Because when I was a scientist, the conference was so dry, and I was feeling like, oh my God, I am where I should be, like so much more happy. Because the last few years of my scientific career, I was bidding my time until I could leave. And I remember going to conference and being bored out of my skull and so I gave a talk at this convention, and I felt so much in my power because I was able to drum, and I was able to talk about it. I was able to share stuff about me that I would never share. I've been allowed to share in a scientific thing, and just felt really like I'm allowed to be my whole self. Not that anybody need to do the allowing, but it was such a defining moment for me to be
authentic self.
To be able to give that because often because of my scientific background, people have often asked me, how come you left science to do this weird thing? How come you got a PhD and you do Reiki? And I'm like, because I can. Again, a disease of our society is you're either that or that, right?
Yep.
It's very like pigeonholy. You're only a scientist, or you're only a non-scientist, and a non-scientist is dismissed as being seen as crap, right?
It's like cutting us in half, the soul and the mind. There's a big we're not a whole until we bring it back together.
I see Wendy's asking, do you have a drum? And I do not have a drum. Any suggestion where to source one? I would like to birth one in the future. So Wendy, yes, I have written a blog about this, especially because when I started teaching my students, I was like, They have no idea where to get drums. And I then realized, and didn't realize until I started writing it down, that because I have 20 drums and I've been doing this for 10 years, I've got a heck of a lot of knowledge, because I'm really obsessive about knowledge when I get into a subtopic. So of course, because I've got drum for lots of different people. So in the blog, I explained how to go about getting a drum, especially if your budget is limited. So for instance, if you're in the UK, I explained that a very, very affordable starter drum is to buy an Irish Baran. So an Irish Baran is just a round drum with a cross made of wood at the back to hold it. And it works perfectly well as a shamanic drum, because that's the first one I used. I still have it. But you can find second-hand Baran on eBay and Facebook Marketplace for as little as 30 to 40 pounds. But when you look at, so for instance, a also good starter drum, which I have, is a synthetic drum by a brand called Remo, called Buffalo Drum. I believe they sell around the world, because Remo is a big company. And some people prefer to work with, I personally prefer to work with animal skins. They're for me more of a spirit, but I'm very, very grateful I have my Buffalo Remo drum, because in the winter I drum outdoors and I drum in the woods at dawn when it's really cold and wet, and my skin drums can't work because you need a fire to warm them up. And where we drum is a nature reserve, we're not allowed to make fire. And therefore, from like October until April in the UK, I can only use my synthetic drum, and I am very grateful, because the synthetic drum also, it can be wet. Like I could have played it in the pouring rain and it's fine, whereas a skin drum cannot be wet.
That's like
And
my kangaroo drum. In this humid environment, it doesn't work.
no, exactly. When I had a very big surprise when I taught a Closing the Bone course in the summer of 2022, and we had an unexpected 40 degrees in Cambridge. And then I picked up my drum and it went boop, 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 boop. And I was like, well, I don't understand, because I thought the heat would have made it sound more high pitch. What actually happened is the room where we were practicing the massage, everybody was sweating. So the room was so humid. It's when I opened the windows, then the drum started to sound okay again. And the other thing I wanted to say, Wendy, is that there are people who run drum bursting workshops all around the world. And in the UK, I find that Melanie Sirat from thedrumwoman.com, she's absolutely awesome. She drums. In fact, I'm going to do a drum bursting with her again next year, because she's running one in Glastonbury called the Higher Heart of Avalon, where we are going to be blessing the skin in the sacred wells there. And I just feel it's going to be a high, Avalon and Glastonbury is supposed to be the heart chakra of the world. And so the drum will have, because when you create a drum, it has the energy of what happened when you created it. So the drum I've made, the egg-shaped one, I've made on shamanic land in Bedfordshire, not very far from Cambridge. That it spent 4 days on the land creating this drum, and it is quite magical. But I'm still very excited to go and make another drum in that space, because I just think it'd be absolutely magical. Yeah.
And if you're in Australia watching, I can put you in touch with people. You probably have them already on your blog. But I know some people that I birthed my drum with.
I might not have them, Mel. I'm always interested to hear, because the problem for me is when I've recommended people. So there's people outside of the UK that I can recommend because I've got their drums, but they don't have drums from anyone in Australia. So it's like usually second-hand recommendation. And sometimes I've gathered the names of people that people have mentioned to me, and I put them on the blog, and some people have told me that person is no longer making drum.
Yeah, some people take a break.
Yeah.
But once you get to know people, they'll put you in touch with other people.
Exactly. And usually, one of the things I want to explain to people is when you burst a drum, it's a very cottage industry business. It's usually a one-woman band or one-man band. And there's such a small business, there's not a lot of people doing this. So it's usually quite expensive because the materials are expensive. And the people I like to work with and I like to recommend, they're usually people who go a great lengths to make sure that the product they offer are made ethically, provided ethically, the skins are gathered in an ethical manner. Melanie was telling me, for instance, in most Scandinavian, I think it's Sweden, but I think that might be true for most Scandinavian country. They do not waste when there is culling that needs to happen because of wildlife management. They do not waste any part of the animal, whereas in the UK it gets burnt. So again, it's when you buy a drum from someone, you don't necessarily, there's very few people who go to that level of depth of making sure that the it's got a process that you're aware of everything that's happened at every step of the way that you're producing it.
Even the frame, the wood,
Yeah,
people that make have sustainable, ethical story and connection to the trees, and
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've found that because of the way that this process is connecting me with women all around the world, I found women in, there's a place called the Findorm Foundation in northern Scotland. And these women have shown me giant drums they have that been made from the hollowed out trunk of a tree. There's some. I used to have a friend who would, rather than bending wood, he would slice out tree trunks and hollow them out until he had a frame. So there's, it's going to have different energy every time when this, the ultimate thing would be to go and gather the wood and go and gather the skin. There's very few of us who have the skills to be able to do that.
Yeah. Oh,
Mm.
wow, you've just opened up so many more questions about drumming, but you've blown my mind. I didn't know that. I think intuitively I did. I
Yeah,
found myself here in remote northern East Arnhem, Australia. I've been going out and drumming, and synchronistically just finding myself with a pregnant woman on top of
yeah,
a rock, and we just drummed. It
yeah.
just happened. So yeah.
If you happen to know Mel, so one of the things I'm really keen to gather for my book is stories from women who belong to cultures where the drumming was not erased. And I believe this might be the case for Indigenous Australian people. If you happen to find anyone, because I'm basically this tiny little thread and trying to find people, like for instance in Europe, I found the same, what is true for Outer Mongolia is also true for Europe and true for, say, the Amazonie. So the only culture that seemed to have survived the process of Christianization and destruction of paganism and shamanism, and also the colonialization process. So what I found interesting when I did the research, I realized for the first time that what the Western people did to the country they colonized, they did to ourselves, they did to themselves first, right?
Yeah.
So when the church came along, it just went and destroyed all the pagan stuff and built the churches on pagan sites and reclaimed them as their own. But the drumming was always removed. So in the burning of witches, there's a very big theme of removing any power tools. And in culture that had still that drumming, when the church came along, they always burned the drums. So the Outer Mongolia, as far as the 1960s and 70s, they had the Russian government banning shamans, and the people only managed to hold on to that. And the same was true for the Sami in Northern Europe. So people who live in the northern part of Scandinavia and the northern part of Russia, they only managed to hang on to their tradition because they live in the Baka beyond, in a really cold area where the government, the church couldn't get there. And the destruction, the reclaiming, basically, is very hard to find. So I had a friend who had been to meet Sami women, and I said, can you put me in touch with them? And she said, unfortunately, the women I knew have since passed away. So it's very difficult to I would love to have the voice of women, Indigenous women who have retained that practice where it's not been broken. Because unfortunately in the Western world that's not there.
I don't know where I am at the women here. They do the singing, and the men do the clapsticks and the yoradi, the didgeridoo. So
Yeah,
maybe in other parts of Australia, I'll have to explore it.
Yes,
Yeah.
please. Yeah, I was just like basically asking everyone, can you tell me about this? But I had the same thing when I wrote my book about postnatal recovery, is gathering stories that I could share in a book. And the stories blew my mind because often it's been forgotten. And then when you start asking people their stories and it starts weaving a beautiful tapestry of realizing how, for me, the drumming belongs to the whole of humanity. I'm yet to find a culture that doesn't have that. I think it
Yeah.
was everywhere, with a possible exception of New Zealand, because I have New Zealand friends who said they not found evidence of drum. They found evidence of something that looks a bit more like a wooden gong,
Mm,
but no actual drums. And possibly because I think something to do with the type of species that were, um,
maybe.
yeah,
Yeah.
not
Um,
having animals big enough to make
yeah.
skin
Very
drum.
small.
Yeah,
Just a little kiwi bird.
yeah.
Um, what's the name of the drum that's not
So
made
Wendy
with?
already wrote, yeah, it's called Remo Buffalo drum. Buffalo is a misnomer because it's not made of skin, but it's a really good starter drum.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I am sure there'll be more questions later on. So people can contact you
Yeah,
via best way via email or by messenger.
yeah. I mean, on my website sophiemessager.com, there
Yeah.
is. Will you be sharing some links? Should I send you some links? People can find me on sophiemessager.com. There's a contact form there. My email's on there. People
Yeah.
can contact me on Instagram, on Facebook, on Instagram. I'm Sophie underscore Messager. So it's Messager spelled the French name, which is Messager.
Yeah.
And they can basically contact me whichever way they want, to private message or email or anything like that. Yeah. If
Yeah.
it's sharing a story, I prefer email because it's easier to keep track of where. Otherwise, I'm like, somebody messaged me about that, but where the heck was it? Was it on WhatsApp? Was it on Messenger? Was it on Instagram message? Yeah, email is easier to keep track of.